For 3 generations, the locals called it the Devil's Mud Pit, a barren, waterlogged nightmare that bankrupted every man who touched it. But when the town's most arrogant agricultural baron tried to steal it for pennies, the cursed dirt finally gave up a multi-million-dollar secret that would utterly destroy him. To understand the bitter blood in the Willamette Valley, you have to understand the dirt. In this stretch of Oregon, the soil is usually a farmer's greatest ally, rich, loamy, and forgiving. But the 40 acres belonging to Alaric Pendleton were a geological anomaly. Known to the town of Creston simply as the Sinkhole, Alaric's land sat at the bottom of a natural basin. It was composed almost entirely of dense, impermeable, alkaline clay. When it rained, and in Oregon, it always rained, the water didn't drain. It pooled, it stagnated, and it turned the earth into a suffocating, boot-stealing mire. Alaric's grandfather had lost his mind trying to grow corn in it. His father had lost his savings trying to plant a hazelnut orchard in the 1970s, only to watch the trees become stunted and gnarled, their roots choking in the dense, oxygen-starved clay. Now, it was Alaric's turn to lose everything. At 42, Alaric was a man hollowed out by stress and labor. His hands were permanently stained with the gray clay of his failures. He and his wife, Beatrice, had tried everything to make the land profitable. Moisture-resistant winter wheat, specialized soybeans, even an attempt at a commercial cranberry bog that ended in a catastrophic fungal rot. Nothing worked. The farm was a financial black hole, sucking down every dollar of credit. First National Bank of Creston would extend them. And watching like a vulture from the high ground was Clayton O'Donnell. Clayton owned O'Donnell Agricorp, a sprawling 3,000-acre operation that dominated the valley. His fields were perfectly manicured, geometrically laser-leveled, and pumped full of synthetic fertilizers. Clayton was a man who viewed farming not as a relationship with the earth, but as a factory floor. He drove a spotless Platinum Edition pickup truck, wore custom-tooled leather boots that had never touched actual manure, and held local politicians in his deep pockets. Clayton despised Alaric's farm. It was an eyesore that bordered his pristine southern acreage. But more importantly, Clayton had a runoff problem. His aggressive use of chemical nitrates required massive irrigation, and the toxic runoff had to go somewhere. He didn't want to pay the state's exorbitant environmental disposal fees. He wanted Alaric's sunken 40 acres to serve as his own private, unregulated drainage basin. "You're fighting gravity, Artie," Clayton had sneered one morning at Henderson's Feed and Seed, leaning against the counter while Alaric charged another 50 bags of lime he couldn't afford. "That land is cursed. It's a toilet bowl. Sell it to me for $1,000 an acre. Pay off your house. Save Beatrice the embarrassment of a foreclosure. You're drowning." Alaric had gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. "It's my family's land, Clayton, and it's not for sale. Especially not to be your chemical dumping ground." Clayton had just laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Suit yourself. I'll just buy it from the bank in October when they kick you out." Clayton's prophecy was devastatingly accurate. The spring of 2021 brought record-breaking rainfall. The valley flooded, but while Clayton's high-tech drainage system saved his crops, Alaric's fields turned into a stagnant, gray lake. The winter wheat he had gambled his final loan on suffocated and rotted beneath a foot of muddy water. By mid-August, the water had receded, leaving behind a baked, cracked expanse of gray clay that smelled of dead vegetation. The mail brought a certified letter from Gregory Finch, the senior loan officer at First National. It was a notice of default. Alaric and Beatrice were 90 days in arrears on their mortgage. They had exactly 60 days to cure the debt, a staggering $412,000, or the property would go to public auction. Alaric knew, with sickening certainty, that Clayton O'Donnell had just played golf with Gregory Finch that weekend. The machine was in motion. The town was already gossiping. Alaric was going to be the last Pendleton to fail on the cursed mud farm. That night, Alaric sat on his back porch, a glass of cheap bourbon in his hand, staring out at the twisted, stunted silhouettes of his father's failed hazelnut trees bordering the back 10 acres. The property looked like a graveyard. The soil was so hostile, so dense and alkaline, that even the weeds struggled to take hold. It was a wasteland. "We can start over," Beatrice said softly, stepping out onto the porch and wrapping a quilt around his shoulders. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her voice was steady. "We have our health. We'll move to Portland, get factory jobs. We don't have to die on this hill, Alaric." "It's not a hill, B," Alaric whispered, his voice cracking. "It's a swamp, and they're going to drown us in it." 2 weeks later, the reality of the impending eviction had set in. The house was filled with cardboard boxes. Alaric spent his days aimlessly walking the property, taking inventory of rusting irrigation pipes and broken tractors to sell for scrap. It was an exercise in pure humiliation. On a damp Tuesday morning, Alaric was walking the far edge of the property, deep within the tangled, half-dead grove of hazelnut and scrub oak trees his father had planted. He was accompanied by Buster, a scruffy, manic terrier mix they had rescued from the county shelter. The air under the trees was thick, smelling of decaying wood and the sharp, metallic tang of the alkaline mud. Alaric kicked at the hardened clay, cursing his grandfather for buying the land, cursing his father for keeping it, and cursing himself for not selling it to Clayton O'Donnell 10 years ago when he had the chance. Suddenly, Buster began to whine. The dog was violently scratching at the base of a gnarled oak, his paws flinging clumps of gray mud into the air. "Leave it, Buster. Probably just a dead mole," Alaric muttered, trudging forward. But the dog didn't stop. He dug with a frantic, obsessive energy, his snout buried deep in the sticky earth. He snapped his jaws, pulling something out of the mud, and tossed it onto the grass before diving back in for more. Alaric sighed and bent down to inspect what the dog had unearthed. It looked like a deformed, dirt-encrusted potato. It was roughly the size of a golf ball, dark brown and covered in tiny, polygonal warts. But as Alaric picked it up, the smell hit him. It was an aroma unlike anything he had ever encountered on a farm. It was incredibly pungent, a dizzying, intoxicating mix of roasted garlic, damp forest floor, dark chocolate, and old musk. The scent was so rich and heavy it almost felt physical, coating the back of his throat. Alaric rubbed the dirt off the strange object with his thumb. Underneath the mud, it was pitch black. He took a pocket knife from his overalls and sliced it in half. The interior was a beautiful, marbled maze of dark brown and white veins. He didn't know much about specialty cuisine, but he had read farming magazines in waiting rooms. His heart gave a strange, unexpected flutter. "It can't be," he thought. "Not here, not in this toxic sludge." Buster barked, dropping 2 more of the knobby black lumps at Alaric's boots. Alaric dropped to his knees in the mud. He began to dig with his bare hands, tearing at the dense clay around the root system of the oak tree. The earth here wasn't totally flooded. The slight elevation of the tree roots had kept it just moist enough. 6 inches down, his fingers brushed against something hard. Then, another, and another. Within 10 minutes, he had unearthed 12 of them, ranging from the size of a marble to the size of a baseball. The overwhelming, intoxicating aroma filled the small grove. He loaded the lumps into his jacket pockets, his mind racing, and ran back to the farmhouse. Beatrice was taping a cardboard box in the kitchen when he burst through the door, covered in gray mud, breathing heavily. "Alaric, did you fall?" she asked, alarmed. Without a word, he emptied his pockets onto the kitchen table. The dirt-covered lumps clattered against the wood. Within seconds, the powerful, earthy scent filled the entire kitchen, so strong it almost overpowered the smell of Beatrice's coffee. "What in the world is that smell?" Beatrice asked, backing away. "It smells like gas and garlic." "I need to make a phone call," Alaric said, his hands shaking. "I need to go to Corvallis." 3 hours later, Alaric was sitting in the sterile, brightly lit laboratory of Dr. Harrison Gable, the head mycologist at the State University's Agricultural Extension. Dr. Gable was a meticulous man with wire-rimmed glasses who usually spent his days diagnosing crop blights for corporate farms. When Alaric placed the Ziploc bag on the stainless steel table, Dr. Gable looked annoyed. "Mr. Pendleton, if this is a potato fungus, I can direct you to our—" Dr. Gable unzipped the bag. The scent rushed out. The mycologist stopped mid-sentence. His eyes went wide. He quickly grabbed a pair of forceps and lifted one of the sliced halves, bringing it inches from his nose. He inhaled deeply, closed his eyes, and exhaled a long, shaky breath. "Where did you get this?" Dr. Gable asked, his voice suddenly stripped of all professional detachment. "On my farm. In Creston," Alaric said defensively, "under some old oak and hazelnut trees. Is it a truffle?" Dr. Gable carried the specimen to a microscope, sliced a paper-thin sliver with a scalpel, and placed it on a glass slide. He peered into the lens for a long time. The silence in the room was agonizing. "Mr. Pendleton," Dr. Gable finally said, turning around. "The European black truffle, Tuber melanosporum, is one of the most notoriously difficult fungi to cultivate on Earth. It requires very specific, highly alkaline soil, usually a pH of around 7.9. Oregon soil is naturally acidic. It's why people grow blueberries and pine trees here. Truffles don't grow here naturally, at least not the highly prized European variants. Alaric's heart sank. So, it's fake? A weed? No, Dr. Gable said, his eyes gleaming. I don't know what your grandfather did to that land, but this is a perfectly developed, wild hybridized, paragored black truffle. The density of the clay on your property, combined with what I assume was a desperate, massive over-liming decades ago, trapped the alkalinity. The poor drainage created a micro-anaerobic seal. It killed your crops, yes, but it perfectly mimicked the limestone-rich, water-stressed soils of southern France. The trees your father planted suffered, and when trees suffer, they form symbiotic relationships with fungi to survive. Dr. Gable walked back to the table, looking at the bag of truffles like they were made of gold. You didn't grow a weed, Alaric. You accidentally created the single most perfect truffle incubator in North America. These are spectacular. The marbling, the aroma profile. It's unparalleled. What are they worth? Alaric asked, gripping the edge of the table. A high-end restaurant in San Francisco or New York would pay roughly $120 an ounce for this quality, Dr. Gable said flatly. That's almost $2,000 a pound. How many acres of these dying trees do you have? 10, Alaric whispered. The blood was roaring in his ears. 10 solid acres of root systems. If the yield is consistent, Dr. Gable calculated, adjusting his glasses, you are sitting on a harvest worth potentially $3 to $4 million annually. Alaric couldn't breathe. The cursed mud, the toxic gray pit that had driven his grandfather to an early grave and stripped his father of his dignity. It wasn't a barren wasteland. It was a vault. There's a catch, though, Dr. Gable warned, his tone growing serious. Truffles are notoriously volatile. They must be harvested within a very specific window of ripeness, usually in the dead of winter, and you need trained dogs. But more importantly, the moment the specialty food market finds out a domestic farm is producing this volume of paragored truffles, word will spread. People will trespass. Corporate competitors will try to steal the spores. Or worse, buy you out through hostile means before you can harvest. Alaric thought of Clayton O'Donnell. He thought of the foreclosure notice sitting on his kitchen counter, ticking down from 60 days. Nobody can know, Alaric said fiercely. Not until I have the cash in hand to pay off my bank. I can connect you with a discreet broker in Seattle, Dr. Gable offered, lowering his voice. He supplies Michelin-starred restaurants. Dough. He'll buy whatever you can pull out of the ground, no questions asked. But, Alaric, you need to harvest them fast, and you need to be careful. Alaric drove back to Creston in a state of euphoric panic. He had a secret weapon, but as his rusted truck rattled down the dirt road leading to his property, his stomach dropped. Parked at the edge of his property line, right next to the hazelnut grove, was Clayton O'Donnell's pristine platinum pickup truck. Clayton was standing by the barbed wire fence, holding a pair of binoculars, staring intently at the patches of mud Alaric had dug up earlier that morning. With him was Gregory Finch, the bank manager, holding a clipboard. Alaric hit the brakes, his tires kicking up a spray of gravel. Clayton lowered the binoculars and smiled, a predatory, self-satisfied grin. The bank wasn't waiting 60 days. Clayton had pulled a string, and the trap was snapping shut, just as Alaric found the key to unlock it. Alaric slammed the truck door and marched toward the fence line, his boots sinking into the gray clay. Clayton O'Donnell didn't flinch, offering a condescending smirk, while Gregory Finch, the bank manager, nervously adjusted his tie. "What are you doing on my property, Greg?" Alaric demanded, his voice dangerously low. "Technically, Alaric, we are on a county easement," Gregory stammered, tapping his clipboard. "And given the degraded state of the collateral, the bank felt a pre-foreclosure environmental assessment was necessary. Clayton here generously offered his agricultural expertise. I'm just looking out for the community, Artie," Clayton drawled, leaning heavily against the barbed wire. "Word at the country club is you're completely insolvent. I'm just evaluating how much topsoil I'm going to have to truck in to fix this toxic swamp once the bank hands me the deed. We're looking at an accelerated auction. 30 days, tops." Alaric's blood ran cold. 30 days. They were circumventing the standard 60-day grace period by claiming the property was an environmental hazard. Clayton had manipulated the bank board. "Get off my fence line," Alaric said, his eyes burning into Clayton's. "You'll get your money, Greg, every single dime. Now get off my land before I call the sheriff for trespassing." Clayton chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound, and patted the fence post. 30 days, Artie. Better start packing." As Clayton's platinum truck disappeared down the road, Alaric ran to the house. The clock wasn't just ticking. It had been fast-forwarded. That evening, Dr. Gable's connection arrived. His name was Thomas Gauthier, a high-end specialty foods broker from Seattle who supplied Michelin-starred kitchens like Times Providence Times in Los Angeles and Times the French Laundry Times in Napa Valley. Thomas arrived in an unmarked, mud-splattered Subaru to avoid drawing attention. When Alaric presented the dozen truffles in the kitchen, Thomas's eyes widened. He didn't just smell them. He examined the veining with a jeweler's loupe. "Mon Dieu," Thomas whispered, dropping the loupe. "These aren't just good, Mr. Pendleton. These are exceptional. The high alkalinity of your clay has stressed the fungus perfectly, creating a density of flavor I've only seen in the Périgord region of France. I will pay you $1,500 a pound, cash, right now, dot. And I will take every single ounce you can pull out of that mud." Thomas left that night with a vacuum-sealed bag of truffles and left behind $18,000 in banded $100 bills. It was more money than the farm had grossed in 2 years. But it was only a fraction of the $412,000 Alaric needed to stop the foreclosure. The secret harvest began. Alaric and Beatrice became ghosts on their own land. Harvesting truffles is delicate, painstaking work, and doing it in secret was agonizing. Because they couldn't risk Clayton seeing them from his elevated property during the day, they worked in the dead of night. They bought military-grade red light headlamps, which wouldn't be visible from a distance, and trained Buster to hunt in the dark. From 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., in the freezing, driving Oregon rain, Alaric and Beatrice crawled through the suffocating gray mud on their hands and knees. Buster was a natural. The terrier would dart through the gnarled roots of the hazelnut trees, snort aggressively, and scratch the surface. Alaric would carefully dig with a specialized steel trowel, extracting the black gold while Beatrice cleaned and weighed them in a bucket. It was brutal, back-breaking labor. Their fingernails bled, their knees ached with the damp cold. But every knobby, dirt-caked lump they pulled from the cursed earth was another step toward freedom. Twice a week, Thomas Gauthier made the midnight drive from Seattle, trading heavy canvas bags of cash for coolers of truffles. By the end of the third week, they had amassed over $300,000. The piles of cash hidden beneath the floorboards of their bedroom were staggering, but Clayton O'Donnell was growing suspicious. Alaric wasn't packing. There were no moving trucks. And Clayton, watching through his binoculars during the day, noticed the freshly disturbed earth around the dead hazelnut trees. Paranoia ate at Clayton. He assumed Alaric had discovered something industrial, perhaps an unmapped natural gas pocket or an underground aquifer. Unwilling to wait for the auction, Clayton decided to force the issue. On night 24, Alaric and Beatrice were deep in the grove when Buster suddenly stopped sniffing the ground and growled, the hair on his back standing up. Alaric switched off his red headlamp and pulled Beatrice behind the thick trunk of an oak tree. Through the rain, sweeping beams of high-powered flashlights cut through the darkness. It was Wyatt, Clayton's burly farm manager, accompanied by 2 ranch hands. They had crossed the property line and were actively searching the grove. "Boss says to find whatever he's digging for," Wyatt muttered, kicking a bucket Alaric had left near a stump. "Maybe he found oil. If he did, O'Donnell wants to know, before the bank appraisal tomorrow." Alaric's grip tightened on his trowel. If Wyatt found a discarded truffle, or realized what the disturbed earth meant, Clayton would use his local influence to instantly seize the land under a false environmental injunction. Buster barked a sharp, piercing sound in the silent night. "Over there!" Wyatt yelled, swinging his flashlight toward the oak tree. Alaric didn't hesitate. He stood up, grabbed a rusted, heavy iron irrigation pipe resting against the tree, and slammed it furiously against a metal tractor rim, half buried in the mud. The deafening metallic times, clang times, echoed through the valley like a gunshot. "Get off my property!" Alaric roared into the darkness, racketing the pipe against the metal again. "I'm armed, and you are trespassing on private land." Wyatt and the hands froze. Firing a gun was one thing, but the sheer, unhinged aggression of the metal-on-metal sound in the pitch black terrified them. They didn't get paid enough to get shot by a desperate, ruined farmer. "Screw this," Wyatt cursed, turning around. The three men scrambled back over the barbed wire fence, slipping and falling in the slick gray clay as they fled back to Clayton's land. Alaric fell to his knees in the mud, gasping for air, shaking violently. They had survived the night, but tomorrow was the deadline. The First National Bank of Creston was suffocatingly warm. Inside the glass-walled conference room, Gregory Finch sat at the head of a mahogany table, organizing a stack of foreclosure documents. Sitting across from him, wearing a bespoke Italian suit and sipping a complimentary espresso, was Clayton O'Donnell. He looked like a king waiting to be crowned. The door opened, and Alaric walked in. He didn't wear a suit. He wore his heavy, mud-stained canvas work coat, his denim jeans caked in the dried gray clay of his farm. He looked exhausted, his eyes underlined with deep, dark bags, but his posture was ramrod straight. "Alaric," Gregory Finch said, offering a tight, pitying smile. "I'm sorry it's come to this, but as we outlined, the grace period has expired. Clayton here has generously offered a short sale buyout to cover the principal of your debt, saving you from a total bankruptcy strike." "I'm doing you a favor, Artie," Clayton said smoothly, not bothering to stand up. "Take the deal. Walk away with a shred of dignity. The land is useless." Alaric walked to the table and stared at the foreclosure papers. Then, he reached into his heavy canvas coat. He pulled out a thick, rectangular piece of paper and slammed it down onto the mahogany table. Gregory Finch blinked. He adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. It was a certified cashier's check from Chase Bank in Portland. The payee was First National Bank of Creston. The amount was $412,000. The silence in the room was absolute. Gregory's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked from the check to Alaric, then back to the check. Clayton's espresso cup halted halfway to his mouth. "What is this?" Clayton demanded, his voice suddenly sharp. "Is this a joke? Where did you get that kind of money?" "It's no joke," Alaric said coldly. "The debt is cured. The mortgage is paid in full. The land is mine, Gregory. Sign the release." "Now wait just a minute." Clayton stood up, his face flushing red. "He's insolvent. He doesn't have $500,000. He's running some kind of scam. I have a prior agreement with the bank board." "You had an agreement to buy foreclosed land, Clayton," Alaric interrupted, his voice echoing in the small room. "But the land isn't foreclosed. And it never will be." Gregory Finch, realizing a certified check of this magnitude, cleared the bank of all liability, frantically began signing the release forms, eager to be out of the crossfire. "What did you find?" Clayton snarled, leaning across the table, his composure entirely shattered. "Oil? A gas pocket? I sent my men over there. I know you've been digging up that toxic waste pit." "You were right about one thing, Clayton," Alaric said, taking the signed release forms and folding them neatly into his coat. "The land is a pit. It's terrible for wheat. It's terrible for corn. But it turns out that dense, choking, alkaline clay you despise so much is the exact soil profile needed to cultivate Time's tuber melanosporum." Clayton stared at him blankly. "What?" "Truffles, Clayton," Alaric smiled, a genuine, hard-won smile. "I'm sitting on the largest, most potent black truffle orchard in North America. I sold 80 pounds this month alone. Chefs in New York and Paris are practically begging for them. My mud farm isn't a toilet bowl. It's a gold mine." Clayton's face drained of color. He staggered back, hitting the edge of the glass wall. "Oh, and Clayton?" Alaric added, his hand on the doorknob. "I noticed your boys were in a rush last night when they trespassed. They tripped over your main irrigation outflow valve on the ridge. You've been illegally dumping synthetic nitrates onto my property line to avoid disposal fees. I had an investigator from the EPA come out this morning to take soil samples. They found toxic levels of chemical runoff pooling right at the county waterway." Clayton stopped breathing. "You didn't." "I did," Alaric said. "Good luck with the federal fines." The fallout was swift and merciless. The Environmental Protection Agency didn't just fine O'Donnell AgriCorp. They audited them. They uncovered years of illegal toxic dumping, circumvented environmental fees, and falsified agricultural records. The fines exceeded $7 million. First National Bank, terrified of being implicated, immediately called in all of Clayton's corporate loans. Within 8 months, O'Donnell AgriCorp was completely bankrupt. Clayton's pristine laser-leveled fields were seized by the federal government and sold off at public auction to cover the environmental cleanup costs. Clayton himself moved to Idaho, facing a mountain of ongoing litigation. Meanwhile, Pendleton Estate Truffles became a legend in the culinary world. Alaric and Beatrice hired a full staff and a pack of highly trained Legato Romagnolo dogs. They didn't change the farm. They didn't drain the water or try to fix the clay. They let the cursed mud remain exactly as it was, dense, gray, and perfectly hostile to everything in the world, except the dark, fragrant gold sleeping beneath the roots. If you love this incredible true story of an underdog farmer beating a greedy corporate giant, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss a tale of sweet revenge and hidden treasures. What would you do if you found millions in your backyard? Let us know in the comments below.